There's a yellow dog sitting on the roof of a tree fort, watching clouds drift in slow, cotton-white processions across a candy-colored horizon. Below him, somewhere out across the soft, rolling hills of the land of Ooh, some adventure is probably happening to someone. Monsters are lurking in dungeons. Wizards are arguing over things nobody should argue about. The Candy Kingdom hums its sweet, sugary existence at the edge of the world. But up here on the roof, none of that matters right now. Nobody is in danger. No dungeon needs clearing. No princess is calling for help. There is nothing specifically required of this yellow dog in this particular moment. He has no urgent purpose, and he is completely fine with that. His legs dangle off the roof edge. The afternoon wind moves through his big, floppy ears in slow, soft waves. But the kind of wind that does not push you anywhere but just reminds you that the air is alive. The warmth of the sun settles on his fur like something being pulled gently over sleeping shoulders. His eyes are half closed. His tail gives the occasional slow, lazy wag for no reason at all. Just an involuntary expression of the fact that being alive right now, in this moment, in this body, in this warmth, is something worth acknowledging. He might be thinking about sandwiches. He might be thinking about nothing at all. The distinction, for him, does not seem particularly important, and if you climbed up there beside him, if you sat on that same roof edge with your own feet dangling over the same nothing, and you asked him what the meaning of life is, he would turn to look at you with those wide, comfortable, slightly unfocused eyes, and he would say something so immediately obvious and effortlessly wise that it would quietly rearrange something in the back of your mind. You would not even realize how much until later, maybe weeks later, maybe years later, when you are in the middle of some situation that feels enormous and urgent and genuinely impossible, and a small voice somewhere underneath everything else says, "Focus on what is real, man. That is Jake. That has always been Jake." He is not the hero of Adventure Time in any conventional sense. That designation belongs to Finn, the breathless, sword-swinging, morally earnest human boy who hurls himself at monsters and ethical dilemmas with equal and slightly terrifying enthusiasm, who treats every challenge as something to be overcome through will and courage and the right amount of yelling. Finn is glorious in that way. But Jake is something different. Jake is the one already sitting on the roof while all of that is happening below. Not because he does not care about any of it, but because he has arrived, through some combination of temperament and wisdom and a life fully inhabited, at an understanding that Finn is still building toward. That peace is not the reward you get after the hard things end. It is not something you earn on the far side of difficulty. Peace is something you carry into difficulty, something you generate in the present moment rather than defer to a future one. Adventure Time ran for 10 seasons on Cartoon Network, from 2010 to 2018, and then extended itself into 4 HBO Max specials as distant lands between 2020 and 2021. Across all of that material, Jake the dog appears not just as a supporting character or comic foil, but as one of the show's primary philosophical voices. He is the character through whom the show explores what it means to live well rather than just live heroically. Through Jake, Adventure Time asks questions that are older and harder than, can you defeat the evil? It asks what you want your daily existence to feel like, how you love people, what you do with the knowledge that you are going to die, what you do with the discovery that you are not entirely who you thought you were. This video is about all of that, every philosophical layer of Jake the dog, out from the scenes that directly reference ancient Greek Stoic texts to the ones that quietly explore the nature of identity and change, from his surprising criminal history to his radical acceptance of mortality, from the love story built out of daily Viola appointments to the final reunion in an afterlife that confirms everything his whole life was about. We are going to move through it slowly, with the patience this subject deserves, in the same unhurried spirit that Jake himself moves through most things. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down to something easier. You do not need to be anywhere else right now. The dungeon can wait. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are and what time it is where you are. Seriously. And I want to know if someone is listening to this at 2 in the morning in a different country, or on a train somewhere watching the dark landscape slide by, or in their childhood bedroom with the lights off and a blanket pulled up. That kind of thing matters to me. And while you are down there, If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a genuinely good time. There's a lot more of this kind of content on this channel, and I think if you are here for this one, you will like what else is here. Part 1. Born of Bite and Mud and Love. The Strange Origins of Jake. Before you can begin to understand what Jake the dog believes about the world and how to live in it, you have to understand where Jake the dog comes from. Because his origins are stranger than almost anything else in a show that is already overflowing with strange and wonderful things, and they shape everything about who he is in ways the show takes several seasons to fully unpack, dropping pieces gradually like a trail of breadcrumbs, leading toward a revelation that turns out to be both shocking and somehow exactly right. The simple version of Jake's origin story, the version he himself believed for most of his life, goes something like this. There was a couple, Joshua and Margaret, two dogs who worked as detectives in the land of Ooh. They were competent, deeply in love, and at some point before the events of the show, they discovered a human baby abandoned alone in the woods. The baby was crying, stuck to a leaf, and had apparently been there long enough that a ladybug mother and her daughter had come and gone before Joshua and Margaret stopped. They picked him up, they took him home, and they raised him as their son. His name was Finn. Jake was their other son. Born naturally, it seemed, and raised alongside Finn and their biological son Jermaine in a household built on warmth and love, and Joshua's inexhaustible passion for making pickles. Jake grew up knowing he was a magical dog with stretchy powers. Powers he assumed, with the cheerful confidence of someone who had never examined the question closely, came from rolling around in a magical mud puddle as a puppy. The family was real. The love was real. The breakfast table and the tree fort and the stories his parents told were all real. His origin, as far as he knew, was relatively uncomplicated by the standards of the land of Ooh. That version is mostly true. The important parts, the love, the household, the warmth of being claimed by people who chose you, are all completely accurate. But the circumstances of Jake's actual birth are considerably weirder than the mud puddle story, and the show spent 6 seasons carefully not explaining them before the episode Joshua and Margaret Investigations finally laid it out. The episode is structured as a birthday story. Finn and BMO, celebrating Jake's birthday in the tree fort, ask him to tell them about their parents. Jake says he does not know the story of the day he was born. They never told him. And so the episode becomes a flashback to a time before Jake existed, a kind of prequel mystery following Joshua and Margaret on a case that will turn out to matter enormously. Margaret at this point is already pregnant, visibly so, carrying Jermaine. Joshua keeps suggesting she stay home and rest. She keeps ignoring this suggestion and picking up her crossbow because she is not the kind of person who stays home while there is work to be done, and her being pregnant has not changed that. They receive a case involving a strange creature that has been appearing near Tree Trunk's house. Something that does not match anything in the local fauna, something described as alien in its movements and appearance. They find the creature in the forest. It is blue. It has multiple eyes arranged like a star on its face. It moves with a fluid, unsettling grace, shifting its shape in small, subtle ways as it settles. This creature, whose name we will learn much later, is Warren Ampersand, approaches Joshua and bites him on the head. Not an attack in the conventional sense, something more like an infection. A deliberate one. Joshua gets sick. The bite site swells. Margaret spends days trying to nurse him back to normal, tracking Warren back down to extract an antivenom, keeping Joshua comfortable while the swelling grows and changes and becomes something that no medical knowledge she has can categorize. And then, in a scene that manages to be both surreal and surprisingly tender, the swelling on Joshua's head reaches its full development, and Jake is born out of it. He comes into the world already fully vocal, already dancing, already celebrating his own existence with the particular exuberance that would define him for the rest of his life. "Hello, Daddy. Hello, Mommy. It's so nice to be here with you now," he says, right after his first breath. Joshua and Margaret look at this impossible little yellow creature who has just emerged from a growth on Joshua's head. A creature that is by any standard not their natural child. Not even entirely a dog, the product of some alien biology neither of them fully understands. And they make a decision. Together, with very little deliberation. They are going to keep him, they are going to love him, and they are never, for as long as they both live, going to tell him the truth about where he came from. This decision is the first deeply philosophical thing about Jake's story, and it arrives before the show is even willing to admit it is that. The decision to claim Jake, to make him family in the fullest sense of that word, despite every circumstance arguing against it, is a statement about what family actually is. It says that family is not the product of shared biology or predetermined structure. It is the product of choice. Repeated, sustained, deliberate choice. To show up, to feed, to hold, to tell stories to at bedtime, to let grow, to love specifically and with attention. Joshua and Margaret did not have to keep Jake. They kept him because keeping him was the right thing to do. And because the right thing to do and the loving thing to do turned out to be, as they so often are, exactly the same thing. Jake grew up believing he was loved by the people who raised him, and he was right. He grew up believing his stretchy powers came from a magic mud puddle, and he was wrong. But he grew up into himself, into the particular warm and flexible and present creature he is, and the love that surrounded him was the actual force that shaped him. Not the alien DNA, not the species inheritance. The love. The mud puddle story is wrong in its specifics, but true in its essence. He did get his powers through contact with something that transformed him. That something just happens to have been a family that loved him, rather than a piece of enchanted earth. Joshua himself is worth understanding as a presence in Jake's formation, even though Joshua dies before the show begins, and appears only in flashbacks in a single ghostly visitation. He was a dog who expressed love through challenge, who built a dungeon specifically designed to toughen Finn up, who encouraged his sons toward bravery in the particular way of parents who believe that the world is hard and you need to be harder. He wore a hat for the rest of his life after Jake's birth left a scar on his head, which is a small and touching vanity, the kind of self-consciousness that makes a character feel humanly real. He made pickles with devoted enthusiasm. He told his sons the stories they needed in order to grow. His ghost visits Jake exactly once in the episode Crystals Have Power, appearing from beyond the grave to encourage Jake to fight back against the Crystal Guardians when Jake has taken a vow of nonviolence. The timing and the nature of the intervention are characteristic of everything the show tells us about Joshua. He loves Jake enough to come back, and his specific form of love is an encouragement toward capability. He wants Jake to be strong, not mean, not ruthless, but genuinely capable of meeting the world on its own terms. Margaret was steady, capable, not the type to be rattled by anything, including the unusual circumstances of Jake's origin. She accepted Jake as her child with a pragmatism that was also a form of grace. Jake's characteristic warmth and his tendency to move toward people rather than away from them, his fundamental disposition toward openness and welcome, came from somewhere, and the household Joshua and Margaret built is the most plausible source. She was, as revealed by Jermaine being her natural-born son, not Jake's biological mother at all, and yet she raised him with the same devotion as if he had been. The show treats this quietly and without drama. She was his mother because that is what she chose to be every day until she was not there anymore. Then, much later in the show, the other father arrives. Warren Ampersand is, and as eventually revealed in the 10th season episode, Jake the Star Child. Jake's biological originator, the creature whose bite created the conditions for Jake's existence. He has been watching Jake from a distance for Jake's entire life, observing his adventures through what amounts to long-distance surveillance, building a museum full of artifacts from Jake's history on his home planet. When he finally makes contact with Jake directly, he introduces himself as Jake's other father. He says he is dying. He says Jake is needed for a prophecy that can save his world. He shows Jake the museum. He acts with the warmth and the carefully constructed emotion of a long-absent parent who has finally found his child and wants to make up for lost time. It is all performance. Warren is not dying for reasons that require Jake's presence in grief, but he is dying because draining the stretchy powers from his descendants is how he survives and regenerates, and Jake is simply the latest in a long line of children Warren has exhausted for his own biological continuation. The warmth was fabricated. The watching was not love. There is, it turns out, an enormous and sometimes non-obvious difference between being observed and being known, between being watched from a distance for your entire life and being genuinely known and cared for. Warren chose the former. Joshua and Margaret chose the latter. Jake throws Warren into a black hole. He protects his own children, who Warren was also intending to drain. Then he goes home. And here, in how Jake handles this revelation, is one of the most quietly philosophical things the show does with his character. Jake does not spiral. He does not spend seasons rebuilding his sense of self from the rubble of the revelation. He does not treat the discovery that his biological father was a predatory alien who intended to use him as a resource as evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with his identity all along. He processes it, incorporates it, and continues moving through his life as himself. Not because he is shallow or incapable of depth, he clearly is not, but because his sense of self was never rooted in his biological origins to begin with. His identity was built out of something else entirely. This is a deeply considered philosophical position, even if Jake does not articulate it in those terms. In a culture that frequently treats genetics as destiny, that grounds questions of authentic identity in blood and ancestry and the specific biological circumstances of one's origin, Jake's quiet indifference to those grounds is striking. He is Jake not because Warren Ampersand is his biological father, and not because he emerged from Joshua's head under unusual circumstances. He is Jake because of how he loves, what he chooses, how he treats people, what he makes of his days. Identity, in Jake's lived philosophy, is something you do rather than something you are handed. The mud puddle story, the one Jake believed all those years, the one that turned out to be incorrect in its literal facts, there is still something true about it, when you look at it the right way. He did become who he is through contact with the world, through the texture of the life he was born into, through the specific combination of Joshua's challenge-based love and Margaret's pragmatic warmth and Finn's earnest companionship and Lady Rainicorn's music and all the adventures and mistakes and moments of simple peace that accumulated over the years. That mud was real. It was just made of different things than he thought. And the person who rolled in it came out the other side as Jake, which is the only outcome that, from where we are standing, could ever have made any sense at all. Part 2. The Stoic Dog. On imaginary problems, Epictetus, and the wisdom of letting the cup go. There is a scene in the 4th season episode Puhoi that every teacher of philosophy should be required to show their students before they open any ancient text. It lasts maybe 30 seconds. It involves a dog, a cup, and an open window, and it contains more practical wisdom than most people successfully extract from an entire semester of ethics coursework. Finn is upset. Not cosmically, not in the way he sometimes gets when the world's fundamental structure seems to be coming apart. This is teenager upset. The particular special upset that comes from telling a joke to someone you care about and not receiving the response you hoped for. He has told Flame Princess a joke. She did not respond in the way he hoped. She responded with something non-committal, which is arguably worse than a negative response because it leaves the space open for every possible interpretation simultaneously. And now Finn is in the tree fort, inside a pillow fort that he and Jake and BMO have been building together, turning the non-laugh over and over in his mind, generating increasingly elaborate theories about what it means and what it implies about the relationship and what it says about him specifically as a person. Jake has been watching this process with the quiet attention of someone who has seen it before and knows exactly where it leads. He and BMO are trying to redirect it, but Finn keeps returning to the non-laugh like a tongue returning to a loose tooth. The spiral is very clearly in progress. The walls of the imaginary problem are going up with the speed and inevitability of something constructed from anxiety, which always builds fast. And so Jake picks up his cup. His actual favorite cup, the one he presumably reaches for first every morning, the one whose specific heft and shape are familiar in the way things become familiar through daily contact. He holds it up so Finn can see it clearly. "You see this cup?" he says. "This is literally my favorite cup." He pauses, then he throws it directly out the window. The sound of breaking glass drifts back in from outside. The cup is gone. Jake's expression does not change. Now it's gone forever, he says with complete calm, the voice of someone describing a weather pattern. So it's not real, and I don't care about it anymore. Then the full statement. You're getting all hung up on imaginary problems. You gotta focus on what's real, man. Now, this is funny because it is Jake doing something absurd in service of a point, which is one of his established modes of communication. But the philosophy underneath the comedy is genuine, and it runs deeper than the scene itself. Inch the Adventure Time wiki notes this scene explicitly as a direct reference to the third aphorism of Stoic philosopher Epictetus's Enchiridion, written around 135 AD. The writers knew what they were building. They hid a philosophy lecture inside physical comedy inside a children's cartoon, and it landed harder than most deliberate philosophy lessons. Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher who lived from approximately 55 to 135 AD, and whose work forms some of the clearest and most practically applicable thinking in the entire Stoic tradition. He spent part of his early life as an enslaved person before being freed, and his experience of having essentially no control over the external circumstances of his life gave his philosophy a particular urgency and precision. That his core contribution was a systematic articulation of a distinction that is simple to describe and genuinely difficult to practice. The distinction between what is up to us and what is not. What is up to us, according to Epictetus, is our own faculty of judgment. The impressions we form about events, the desires and aversions we hold, the choices we make about how to respond to circumstances. What is not up to us is everything else. The body's health, our reputation in others' eyes, the outcome of external events, the weather, the future, the reaction another person has to a joke we tell them. The Stoic practice, as Epictetus articulated it in the Enchiridion and in his discourses, was to invest your energy and attention in the first category and release your grip on the second. Not because the second category does not matter, but because suffering over things you cannot control is not wisdom. It is a kind of waste, a drain on the only resource that is genuinely yours, which is the quality of your own attention and response. The cup exercise is Epictetus's principle made physical and slightly dramatic. The cup exists in the realm of things not entirely up to us. Jake can use it, can enjoy it, can prefer it to other cups, but he cannot guarantee it will always be there. He cannot control whether it breaks or gets lost or falls, or is thrown out a window by a dog who is trying to illustrate a philosophical point. And so he pre-releases his attachment to it rather than waiting for the world to take it. The cup is gone. Now it is not real in his immediate experience, not a present object in his field of engagement. He does not have to suffer over it. He removed it from the category of things he might suffer over by removing it from the category of real present things that could be taken from him. It is worth noting that Jake is slightly inconsistent on this point. The show reveals in the same episode that he later fishes the cup back out of the yard, which the Adventure Time wiki mentions as evidence that his belief in determinism is somewhat inconsistent. This is not a flaw in Jake's character. It is a very accurate portrayal of what it actually looks like to hold a philosophical principle in practice. Knowing the right thing and doing it perfectly every time are two different capacities, and the gap between them is where most of actual human life happens. Jake does the cup exercise when it needs doing. He also sometimes goes back for the cup because it really is his favorite. As the principle and the specific weakness can coexist without either invalidating the other. What Jake is really telling Finn in that moment goes beyond the cup. He is describing the entire category of Finn's current suffering, the anxiety about what the non-laugh meant, the fear that it implies something bad about the relationship, the elaborate constructions of what might happen next, as imaginary. Not fake, exactly. Not entirely fabricated, but not yet real in the way that present moment things are real. The non-laugh happened. That was real. The relationship between Finn and Flame Princess exists in the present. That is real. Finn's caring about her is real and present. But the entire edifice of worry about what the non-laugh meant and what it will lead to and whether it signals something terrible, that is a structure Finn built out of his own anxiety and then placed in the center of his attention where actual present moment things should be. Focus on what is real. Set down the cup. Come back to what is here, now, in this specific moment, which is a pillow fort, a warm room, two friends trying to help, the actual texture of a perfectly fine present moment that is being overshadowed by its own imagined future shadow. This distinction between real present moment things and imaginary future tense constructions is one of the most consistently useful ideas in Stoic philosophy and one of the hardest to maintain in practice. The mind is a forward-facing organ in certain respects. It is extraordinarily good at generating possibilities, at modeling outcomes, at projecting forward from current conditions to likely future states. This capacity has enormous value. It is also the specific mechanism by which anxiety produces its suffering. The mind generates a possible bad future, and then the emotional system responds, as though that future were already happening, as though the loss were already real, as though the problem were already present. The suffering is real. The thing causing it is not. Jake has, without necessarily having read any Stoic texts or spent time in deliberate philosophical contemplation, arrived at a practice that manages exactly this. He does not build futures. He lives in presence. And when someone around him starts building an imaginary future and suffering under it, yet he finds a way to gently redirect them back to the actual present, which is almost always better than the imagined worst-case one. The particular quality of his delivery matters, too. He is not gentle about this in the sense of being careful or tentative. He is warm about it, which is different. He does not make Finn feel foolish for having been lost in the spiral. He just breaks the spiral, cleanly and somewhat dramatically, and redirects. You gotta focus on what is real. Here is the present moment. Here is the pillow fort. Here is what is actually going on. Come back here. It works. Because Jake is not making a pronouncement from some elevated philosophical position. He is doing it with his friend in a shared present, as an act of care. The cup is gone. It was always going to be gone eventually. What remains is the afternoon. The warmth, the actual present. That is where the real things live. That is where Jake lives, most of the time, with a consistency that makes it look like not trying. He is trying. He has always been trying. It just looks like not trying, because he has been doing it long enough that it feels like breathing. Part 3. Sucking as the first step. Jake and the philosophy of beginning badly. The 25th episode of Adventure Time's first season is called His Hero, and it builds one of its central scenes around a question that sounds simple and turns out not to be. What do you do when you try the right thing and you are spectacularly, comprehensively, publicly bad at it? Finn and Jake go looking for Billy, who is essentially Oo's legendary hero, a figure spoken of with the hushed reverence people reserve for saints or genuinely transformative athletes, someone whose name Jake invokes the way you invoke a name that is supposed to end arguments. Billy killed monsters. Billy saved people. Billy was so effective at fighting evil that evil apparently learned to reorganize itself around his presence. He was legendary in the truest sense. His deeds had passed into mythology even before his death, which tells you something about the scale of what he accomplished. They find him in a cave. He is retired. He is disillusioned. He has come to believe, through a lifetime of fighting, that violence only generates more violence, that every monster defeated is eventually replaced by another, that the cycle of violence solving violence is not actually solving anything. His prescription for Finn and Jake is to help people through non-violent means, through simple acts of service and kindness, through being present in the ordinary ways that ordinary life requires. Finn, who has organized his entire sense of self around being a hero in the sword-swinging physical sense, throws himself into this alternative approach with full commitment. He tries to help an old lady cross a street and causes a minor disaster. He tries to assist people at a market and makes several things measurably worse. He and Jake move through a sequence of attempted good deeds with a success rate that can generously be described as negative, causing more problems than existed before their intervention in almost every case. Finn is frustrated. He can defeat monsters. He apparently cannot help anyone with ordinary life problems without causing additional ordinary life problems. The competence he has spent his life building is not transferable to this domain. He is bad at this. Not slightly bad. Not the kind of bad that needs a small adjustment. Genuinely, fundamentally, currently bad. And somewhere in the middle of the sequence of failures, with Finn visibly deflating, Jake says the thing. Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. That is it. 11 words. They are probably the most widely quoted 11 words from a show full of quotable lines. They have appeared in commencement speeches and TED Talks and motivational content across more than a decade. A Reddit co-founder, Alexis Ohanian, cited them at the Behance 99U conference as a piece of genuine life wisdom that influenced his thinking about entrepreneurship and learning. They have been turned into wall prints and phone cases and graduation card messages and tattoos on forearms. The reason they travel so well, the reason they have been picked up and carried forward by so many people across so many contexts, is not that they are particularly clever. As a piece of philosophical writing, they are not especially ornate. They resonate because they say something structurally true about how skill and growth actually work, something that is simultaneously obvious when stated and genuinely easy to forget when you are inside the experience it is describing. Learning anything from the beginning involves a period of being worse than you expected to be, worse than people who are already competent at the thing, worse than you feel you have a right to be given how much you care about the outcome, worse than what you imagined when you decided to try. This period is not a sign that you are wrong for attempting it. It is not evidence that you lack the relevant capacity. It is just the structure of beginnings, the necessary entry into any process that eventually leads somewhere better. The failure is not a detour from the path toward competence. The failure is the path. There is no other route. You must go through the sucking to arrive anywhere else. What Jake does with this observation, though, is as important as the observation itself. He does not deliver it as a consolation prize. He does not frame it as an apology for Finn's current incompetence or a prediction that things will eventually be better if Finn just keeps trying. He says it the way he says most of what he knows. As if it is simply a fact about the universe, the way gravity is a fact, the way morning follows night. Of course you suck at this. You just started. That is what starting means. The sucking is not a problem to be solved or a state to be endured. It is a phase to inhabit, pass through, and emerge from on the other side. The first step. Not a problem with steps 1 through 3, just step 1. This is subtly different from encouragement culture wisdom. Encouragement culture says, it is okay to fail, you will get better, keep going, believe in yourself. Which is not wrong, but it still centers the failure as a problem requiring management, something to get past, overcome, eventually transcend. Jake does not frame it that way. There is no failure here that needs management. There is just the beginning, which always involves not being good yet, which is just where beginnings are. The psychological research on learning and skill acquisition actually supports Jake's intuition with considerable precision. What researchers describe as the initial steep portion of the learning curve, the period when errors are most frequent and progress feels most invisible, is not a sign of the absence of ability. It is a sign that the brain is reorganizing existing neural structures to accommodate new patterns. But the felt sense of being bad at something often corresponds with the period when the most important underlying changes are occurring. The experience of sucking, in other words, is frequently the interior experience of genuine development. Saya, who presumably has never read a paper on neural plasticity, has arrived at a compatible intuition through some mix of natural temperament and the accumulated experience of having started many things from the beginning. He is not organized around the question of whether he is impressive. This question genuinely does not appear to interest him. He can do many things well, He is a capable fighter, a skilled musician, and occasionally penetrating friend. But he also makes large, invisible mistakes with regularity, gives spectacularly wrong advice from time to time, and then seems entirely unbothered by the fact that he is not excellent at everything, because excellence was never the point. The practical result of this in his relationship with Finn is one of the most quietly extraordinary things about the show. Finn is, across its run, repeatedly confronted by the edges of his own competence, emotional limits, philosophical confusion, physical situations that exceed his current capacity. What allows him to keep encountering his own edges and growing through them, rather than turning away from them in protective avoidance, is partly his own character. Yes, but also partly Jake's consistent refusal to make the moments of incompetence feel catastrophic. Jake does not make incompetence feel like evidence against Finn. He makes it feel like Tuesday, which is exactly what it is. Just Tuesday. Keep going. The same philosophy extends to how Jake handles his own failures. He is wrong often. He knows he is wrong often. He does not spend extended time in anguished retrospective examination of his wrongness. He notes it, learns what there is to learn, and keeps moving. He is, in this sense, a genuine practitioner of what he preaches. Not a philosopher who has figured out the right ideas and now teaches them from an elevated position while secretly struggling with them, but someone who actually lives the way they think, because the thinking grew out of the living rather than the other way around. The first step is sucking. Then the next step is being slightly less bad. Then somewhere a long time down the road, you are sort of good at something, which is not a triumphant destination, so much as a comfortable place to keep learning from. Jake reached sort of good at many things and has been learning from that comfortable place ever since. He did not mind the sucking while it was happening. He knew what it was. He knew it was just the beginning. Part 4. The Laid-Back Superego. Conscience Without Punishment. There is a reading of Adventure Time, articulated most fully by the Good Men Project in an analysis of the show's characters through a psychoanalytic lens that positions Jake the dog as the show's superego. In Freudian terms, the superego is the internalized voice of moral standards, the part of the mind that holds conscience, judges behavior against ideal behavior, and enforces those judgments through guilt and shame. It is the part that says you know better than that. It is the part that makes you feel bad when you act against your values. Jake is clearly this in relation to Finn. He is the older, wiser presence, the one who has seen more, who knows how the land of Oo actually works, who carries the moral framework within which Finn's actions take place and develop. When Finn acts from impulse rather than reflection, Jake is usually the one who redirects him. When Finn is in a moral fog, Jake provides a bearing. When Finn does something wrong, Jake is usually the first person whose opinion matters to him. The superego identification is apt. What is remarkable is the kind of superego Jake represents, because in most psychoanalytic models, and in most cultural representations of conscience, the superego is strict. It punishes. It uses guilt as its primary instrument and shame as its follow-up. Thus, the conventional conscience hovers over the ego, pointing out every deviation from the ideal, comparing what is to what should be, generating the low-grade suffering of moral self-judgment that is so familiar it passes for the natural texture of having a conscience at all. Jake is almost perfectly opposite to this. He guides without punishing. He redirects without shaming. He is present without being insistent. The Good Men Project analysis describes his parenting style, because he is functionally Finn's parent as well as his brother, as nearly opposite to helicopter parenting while remaining deeply and consistently present. He does not follow Finn through every decision, pointing out where it might go wrong. He does not monitor Finn's moral development with the anxious intensity of someone who believes mistakes are catastrophic. That he trusts Finn to make decisions and learn from them, including the wrong ones. His goal, when he does intervene, is never to make Finn feel bad about what he did. It is to help Finn understand what he did well enough to do differently next time. The inquiry is practical and forward-looking. The aim is clarity and growth rather than penance. This is a fundamental difference from punishing superego conscience, and it produces a different result. Finn does not carry a heavy load of ongoing guilt about his past mistakes. He processes them, understands them, carries them forward as experience rather than as weight. He can keep growing because he is not being crushed. The anti-festering philosophy is a key part of this. But Jake's insistence that festering is always bad, that there is no good kind of festering, is not just advice about specific situations, but a general orientation toward how to relate to one's own difficulty. Process the difficulty until you understand it, then release it. Carrying it further than that is not wisdom or moral seriousness. It is just suffering without benefit. The psychological research on rumination, repetitive, passive focus on one's own distress, consistently shows it correlates with worse mental health outcomes rather than better ones. The alternative, which is acknowledging difficulty and then redirecting attention, produces better results by significant margins. This is not suppression. You are not pretending the difficult thing didn't happen. That you are recognizing when continued focus on it is generating more suffering than understanding and choosing to stop. Jake knows this intuitively, and he helps Finn find his own version of this boundary. Jake's own moral history makes him a more effective guide than he would be if he had always been virtuous. He was a criminal. He knows what it looks like to make choices that go wrong, to be shaped by forces other than your best self, to look back at a past self and recognize the distance traveled. When he tells Finn that it is possible to change, to become someone different through different choices made consistently, he is not delivering an abstract principle. He is describing something he lived. And that lived authority gives the guidance a weight that theoretical correctness could never provide. His stretchy physical powers are. The show suggests through multiple episodes a visual metaphor for his character. He is flexible. He is adaptable. He can hold multiple shapes simultaneously without any of them being false. His physical capacity to stretch between extremes, to reshape himself for whatever situation requires, is the external expression of an internal orientation that refuses to be stuck in any single rigid position. The more you stretch, the easier it becomes to see that many things you were rigid about were never worth the rigidity. The flexibility is the philosophy made visible, walking around in yellow fur. Part 5. Love, Viola, and the Daily 4 o'clock appointment. Jake plays the viola. This detail appears in the pilot episode of Adventure Time and never stops mattering. In a show that thinks carefully about what every element of a character signals, now the choice to give Jake a viola, not a guitar, not drums, not any of the louder, more immediately obvious instruments, is considered and deliberate. The viola is the middle voice of the string family, not the soaring, often featured violin and not the deep, resonant cello. The middle voice. It sits between the extremes, holds the harmony together from within, carries the inner lines of music that give the outer ones their full meaning. Violists sometimes describe themselves with a particular rueful pride as the heartbeat of the ensemble, essential to the whole, not given the melody very often. The back of Jake's viola has the word toots scratched into it, in letters Jake presumably put there himself at some point. This is perfect. But it takes a beautiful thing and makes it his rather than precious. Turns an instrument into specifically Jake's instrument, the one with that specific word scratched on the back, the one that has Shelby the worm living inside it, the one that produces that particular sound when played in the specific way he plays it. He has had it since the pilot. He plays classical pieces on it. Mozart when he is trying to attract snakes for reasons he considers sufficient. Beethoven when the mood calls for something more atmospheric. His own renditions of whatever the moment wants when the moment is undefined enough to accommodate anything. And he plays it with Lady Rainicorn. Lady Rainicorn is Princess Bubblegum's best friend and royal steed, a Korean-speaking rainbow unicorn who moves through the sky with the particular grace of something that was always supposed to be in the air. She is beautiful, competent, deeply loyal, and speaks a language that almost no one else in the show understands. Which means that in most situations, she is surrounded by a communication barrier that makes her somewhat opaque, somewhat distant, somewhat more alone than she perhaps would choose to be. Jake speaks Korean. He learned it for Lady. Not because she required it or made it a condition of the relationship, because she matters to him and her language matters, and the gap that exists between her and almost everyone else in U does not have to exist between her and Jake. He did the actual concrete work of learning something difficult in order to close a distance that mattered to someone he loves. That is love as practice rather than feeling, a specific thing you do in the world because the other person's experience is real to you. Jake meets Lady every day at 4 o'clock. This fact is confirmed in the episode My Two Favorite People and established as a pattern rather than an occasional thing. Every day. Not most days, not when nothing else is happening. Every day. With the quiet, regular devotion that does not produce dramatic scenes or romantic declarations because it does not need to. It produces instead a relationship that holds up over years so because it was built on showing up day after day at the same time, until showing up is just what you do. This is the middle of love. But we are culturally obsessed with the beginning of love, the recognition, the declaration, the first moment when feeling becomes certainty. The middle of love is considerably less narratively interesting because it does not climax. It does not build toward revelation. The middle of love is meeting someone at 4 o'clock because it is 4 o'clock, and this is what 4 o'clock means now. It is the accumulated weight of ordinary days given to another person, piling up until they constitute something that is the relationship itself, rather than a series of events within a relationship. Jake and Lady Rainicorn live in the middle of love. They are not in the falling in love episode. They are in the decades of daily appointments, the shared musical language, the raising of 5 rapidly aging pups, the ordinary texture of a life built in common. This lady says she loves Jake because he's an idiot and that he makes her feel like a genius. This exchange contains more truth than it initially lets on. She is not saying he is dim. She is saying that his particular flavor of earnest, sometimes catastrophically wrong, always genuinely committed engagement with the world creates space in which her own precision and intelligence feel valued and visible. He makes room for her. His looseness accommodates her exactness. His willingness to be fully, uncomplicatedly himself gives her own more contained expression somewhere to expand into. They are genuinely, specifically complementary. Not in the fairy tale sense where one person fills the other's absence, but in the adult sense where two people's particular shapes fit well enough together to make something sustainable. Jake gets jealous. Yeah, the show does not hide this. When Mr. Cupcake flexes his muscles in front of Lady in the episode Videomakers, Jake storms off. He is territorial and slightly unhinged about it in the moment. This is not Jake at his philosophical best. It is Jake being human, which is to say imperfect, and knowing it and still doing it anyway. He does not seem particularly proud of the jealousy. He has enough self-awareness to recognize the gap between who he wants to be about this and who he actually is in the moment the jealousy arrives. He does not always close that gap gracefully. He closes it eventually in his own way, and the relationship holds. The love story becomes family when their pups are born. 5 of them: Charlie, Jake Jr., Kim Kilwan, TV, and Viola, the last named for the instrument, because of course she is. Yes, the Rainicorn pups age at an extraordinary rate due to their Rainicorn inheritance, going from newborns to apparent adults in what amounts to days. Weidam, who had no framework for this, approaches parenthood with a combination of overwhelming love and total practical unpreparedness that produces some of the episode Jake the Dad's best moments. He cannot sleep because he is terrified something will happen to the pups, makes French toast at strange hours, falls asleep on the job, and is then rescued from foxes by the very pups he was supposed to be protecting, because they have grown up enough to manage foxes while he was struggling to stay awake. There is a small, quiet moment in Puhoy that is worth sitting with. BMO asks Jake why he doesn't play with his pups, the way he used to play with BMO. Jake explains that Rainicorns age so fast, there is barely time to know them before they are already grown and gone into their own lives. BMO asks if Jake regrets this. Jake's face goes briefly, visibly sad, before Finn returns and distracts him from the question. He does not answer. The sadness is there, real and momentary, and it names something true about love across time. The things you love change. They grow into their own stories, move into their own lives, become themselves in ways you could not have predicted and sometimes cannot follow. You hold them as long as they let you. You release them when they are ready. You carry the love forward into whatever comes next. The viola is still there, played every day at 4 o'clock. Some things hold. Part 6. The Croak Dream. Radical Acceptance of Mortality. Season 3 of Adventure Time gave us, in an episode called The New Frontier, approximately 12 minutes of television that manages to be simultaneously a character comedy, a philosophy seminar, and a genuinely moving meditation on what it means to accept the fact that you are going to die. It is built around a premise that sounds dark and turns out to be surprisingly warm. Jake the dog finds out, in broad outline, how and when he is going to die, and his response is excitement. The episode opens in darkness, in the specific soft dark of a sleeping brain. Jake is having a croak dream, what the show establishes as a recognized phenomenon in the land of Oo, a prophetic dream marked by the presence of the cosmic owl, on a vast ancient bird whose appearance confirms that what you are seeing is not ordinary dream material, but a genuine vision of your eventual death. The cosmic owl does not visit for symbolic purposes. When it appears in your dream, what you are seeing is going to happen. Jake's dream involves floating in the vacuum of space. There is a banana man in a helmet. There is a rocket ship. Jake runs out of air. He turns red from the exertion of trying to breathe where there is nothing to breathe. He deflates. The cosmic owl screams and wakes him. He runs to find Finn. He needs to tell him about this immediately because it is interesting, because knowing is better than not knowing, because the cosmic owl confirmed it, and that is genuinely significant. He is visibly excited about this. And that excitement, that genuine, unperformed excitement about having seen the approximate shape of his own death, is the episode's central philosophical statement. Jake is not scared. He is not performing bravery over a private terror. He woke from a dream that showed him his death, and his first thought was, I need to tell Finn about this. The knowing itself is not a burden, it is a clarification. When I die, Absadi, he tells Finn, my individual Earth consciousness is going to go all over everywhere while Glob tallies my deeds. He believes this. It is his cosmology, the framework within which death makes sense to him, not as an ending, but as a transformation, a release into something larger, an accounting followed by whatever comes after accounting. And knowing the approximate form of his exit does not frighten him. It makes the remaining time more vividly itself. It confirms what he already moves, as if he knows. That this specific afternoon in this specific tree fort with this specific person matters exactly as much as it looks like it matters. Not more, not less. Exactly as much. Because it is real, it is here, and it will not always be. Finn's response is the episode's emotional counterweight. He cannot hold this information at all. He is young, he has built his entire world around Jake's presence in it, and the idea of losing Jake is something he has not previously been required to hold consciously. He does not want Jake to die, he wants to fix it. He spends the rest of the episode in increasingly frantic attempts to prevent the dream from coming true, hiding Jake from the Banana Man when the Banana Man appears in real life. But following the logic of the dream and trying to eliminate each variable before it can assemble into the prophesied sequence. This is love expressed as control, which is the most recognizable possible human response to the prospect of losing someone irreplaceable. When you love someone and the fact of their mortality becomes suddenly undeniable, the impulse to do something, to prevent, to intervene, to find the loophole that the universe left open, is immediate and overwhelming. It is not irrational. It comes from love. It is just not possible. The love is real. The control is not available. Jake's response is love expressed as trust. Trust in the larger shape of things, in the fact that death is part of the structure rather than a violation of it. In the sufficiency of a life fully inhabited, even when that life ends. He does not resist the croak dream. He follows its unfolding with the same curious attention he brings to most things, participates in the chaotic events that result from Finn's prevention attempts, and holds his own mortality with a steadiness that looks from the outside like indifference but is actually the result of the most careful possible attention to reality. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote extensively on this. His letters on mortality, specifically on how the consciousness of death changes the quality of life, make an argument that maps cleanly onto Jake's natural disposition. People who cannot face death tend to avoid thinking about it, and unexamined fear leaks into everything, making the present feel unstable, draining color from ordinary pleasures, that turning the good parts of life into sources of anxiety about their eventual loss rather than occasions for genuine presence. The alternative is not obsession with death, but honest acknowledgement, holding its reality steadily enough that it loses its power to ambush, and then getting on with the business of living fully in the light of that reality. Whether he has ever encountered Seneca or not lives exactly this. He holds his mortality with a steadiness that comes from having genuinely faced it rather than avoiding it. And the result is a quality of presence in his daily life that the avoidance strategy never allows. He is actually here in each present moment, in a way that is only possible when you are not spending energy managing your fear of it ending. The episode's resolution is characteristic adventure time, a blend of genuine emotion and physical comedy that somehow makes the emotion land harder for being wrapped in the absurd. Finn's presence changes the dream's configuration enough that Jake does not die this time. Jake tells Finn the dream will come true again someday when Finn is not there. Finn announces in a deeply unsettling sing-song voice that he can never leave Jake's side ever again for the rest of their lives, and chases Jake around the tree fort while Jake flees, laughing. Then the episode closes on the Banana Man dancing alone in his backyard for an extended comedic sequence because there was some time to fill, and Weird Al Yankovic dancing in a banana suit is always the right choice. But before the comedy deflects it, the central truth lands cleanly. Jake is not afraid of dying. He is at peace with his mortality in a way that is not the peace of indifference, but the peace of someone who has genuinely inhabited the reality of their own finitude and found on the far side of that inhabiting that the life they have is more vivid and more worth attending to than it was before the question was faced. Part 7. Focus on what is real. Jake and the practice of the present moment. One of the most pervasive but least discussed threads in Jake's philosophy is his deep, natural, apparently practiced commitment to the present moment as the only place where life actually happens. It shows up in the cup scene. It shows up in his croak dream acceptance. And it shows up in the daily 4 o'clock appointments, and in the cosmic sandwich wish, and in the way he sits on rooftops watching clouds and finds the experience sufficient. It shows up in how he handles difficulty without pre-suffering it, and how he handles loss without ruminating over it, beyond what is useful. The present moment orientation is not one piece of Jake's worldview. It is the foundation under most of the others. Most people, most of the time, do not live primarily in the present. The mind is a time-traveling organ. It moves easily and frequently into the future, modeling outcomes and anticipating events and generating worries about what might happen, and into the past, replaying events and analyzing what happened and wondering what it meant. But the actual present moment tends to be something people pass through on their way between past and future rather than a place they actually inhabit with full attention. Jake inhabits it. Not perfectly and not always. He has moments of distraction, of jealousy, of anxiety, but as a baseline toward which he returns naturally, the place he lives from more than any other. He is responsive to what is actually happening. He is curious about what is actually present. He experiences what is actually available to be experienced, rather than spending his capacity on rehearsing what already happened or pre-living what might happen next. Buddhist meditation traditions have built elaborate practices around the cultivation of this kind of present moment awareness, called mindfulness, the practice of being here, fully with full attention, and in whatever is actually occurring rather than in memory or anticipation. Jake does not meditate. He has no formal practice. He appears to have arrived at his present orientation through some mix of temperament and the accumulated choices of a life lived this way, which is the way most people who are genuinely present actually get there. Not through discipline, but through a long series of small choices to come back to here. The practical manifestation is visible in how Jake experiences pleasure. He does not experience it partially, with part of his attention already somewhere else. He enjoys food with his whole body. He loves music with genuine, full, uncomplicatedly expressed enthusiasm. But he loves the afternoon warmth and the company of people he likes, and the particular pleasure of a well-made sandwich, and he lets all of these be fully what they are without modulation. He is not embarrassed by his preferences and does not perform detachment about things he actually enjoys. The cosmic wish scene is the complete expression of this. When Jake and Finn reach Prismo's time room and each receive a wish for anything at all. Any wish for anything. The power of the Wishmaster applied to whatever you can clearly desire. Finn uses his wish to address an apocalyptic catastrophe. Jake uses his wish on a pastrami sandwich. This is comedy. It is also philosophy. Jake knew what he wanted, but the cosmic opportunity did not change what he actually wanted. It just created the space in which his actual wants could express themselves without the usual filtering. He wanted the sandwich. He had always wanted the sandwich. The sandwich was here now, real and warm and exactly right. Not an abstraction, not a future benefit, not a wish for power or security or capability or love or any of the things people typically imagine they would wish for when asked hypothetically. A sandwich. Present and specific and exactly what he actually wanted in the moment of wanting. The Stoics believed that the good life was not found by acquiring things, but by relating correctly to what is present, by wanting what you have rather than having what you want. Jake does not articulate this as a position. He just lives it. The sandwich is there. It is good. He wants it. He has it. This is the whole arc, and it is complete. Part 8, The Criminal Who Chose Otherwise. Jake and the Ethics of Reinvention. Before Finn came into his life, Jake was a criminal. The show does not soften this. He ran a gang. He was effective at what he did. The show reveals across multiple episodes, on a path that would have led him to become something considerably darker if it had continued. In the episode Dentist, Tiffany, one of Jake's former gang members, tells Finn plainly, if you had never come into Jake's life, Jake would have continued down that path and was aiming to become a powerful mob boss. This is stated with Tiffany's particular blend of obsession and bitterness, but the factual claim is not disputed by anyone. Jake was that person, but he walked away from it when something changed. The ethics of this history, how Jake relates to it, what obligation it places on who he is now, what it means for his moral character, form one of the quieter but most carefully considered threads in the show's treatment of his character. Jake does not carry his past as a permanent weight. This is the most striking thing about his relationship to it. He does not perform elaborate guilt about his former criminal life. He does not treat himself as fundamentally compromised or permanently defined by those choices. In One Last Job, when his daughter Jake Jr. has romanticized the criminal past and arranged a fake kidnapping, specifically to see her father operate in that mode, to experience the version of him she had heard stories about, Jake corrects this gently, but without ceremony. But he tells her what he did was wrong. He does not do it anymore. That is the whole statement. Clear, direct, without embellishment in either direction. This requires a philosophical position about identity across time. The question underneath Jake's approach is, are you the same person as the person who did those things? If you are, do you carry permanent responsibility for them in a way that should define your current selfhood? Jake's implicit answer is something like, yes, there is continuity, and no, that continuity does not trap you in permanent definition by your worst choices. Who you are is partly a function of what you have done and partly a function of what you are doing now, and partly a function of what values and orientations you sustain across the changes. Past actions are real. They had effects. They shaped who you became. But they are not more real in the present moment than the choices you are making right now. The skills his former life built, the tactical flexibility, the comfort with moral ambiguity, the decisiveness, did not disappear when his values changed. They transferred. The same stretchy intelligence that made him effective at theft makes him extraordinary in situations that require rapid creative problem-solving and physical adaptability. The same capacity for decisive action under pressure that would have made him a successful criminal made him capable of throwing Warren Ampersand into a black hole without excessive deliberation when Warren threatened his family. Same capacity, different direction, same person, different choices. The choices, accumulated over the years and sustained through difficulty and temptation, are who he is now. And they are more real than the choices he made before them, not because they erase those choices, but because they are the current expression of the person he has become through all of it. Part 9. The True Form. On Identity, Change, and What Holds. When Everything Shifts. The End of the Elements miniseries transforms Jake. The concentrated elemental magic of a corrupted land of ooh reaches into his biology and pulls out something that was always there but never expressed. The Warren Ampersand inheritance. the alien shapeshifter DNA that his body was always carrying beneath the comfortable yellow roundness. Jake emerges blue, five-eyed, bat-winged, with an alien geometry to his body that looks nothing like the Jake everyone has known. The episode Abstract deals with what happens next, and it is one of the most psychologically complex episodes in the series. Everyone knows it is still Jake. Finn knows. BMO knows. Lady knows. They tell him they know. But knowing something in your mind and being fully comfortable with its current expression are different capacities, and the episode is honest about the difference. Finn can barely make eye contact. BMO is distressed. Dirt beer guy. At the Candy Tavern does not recognize Jake and walks away after their conversation without realizing who he was talking to. Jake himself is caught in something difficult to name. He keeps insisting, too much, with the specific over-insistence of someone who is not entirely certain of what they are saying, that he is still the same Jake, that nothing has fundamentally changed, that the exterior is different, but the interior is identical. But the gap between what he is saying and what he is experiencing grows visible as the episode progresses. He is having a crisis of identity that he would usually help Finn not have, which is the ordinary human truth that knowing the right philosophical response to a situation does not guarantee you can access it when the situation is yours. He dreams of his half-brother Jermaine, who has changed, who has been painting landscapes for years and has recently shifted to abstract work, to shapes and colors, and emotional resonances that do not represent things directly. Jermaine used to think abstract art was pretentious and empty. Now he finds it a more complete way of capturing something true. He opened his mind. His work changed. He is still Jermaine. Jake comes home from this dream with the understanding slowly settling into him. People can change while remaining themselves. The fundamental shape of who you are can persist through the changes your body and circumstances impose on it. And sometimes what you thought was your fixed form was never the complete picture anyway. Sometimes who you are contains more than you knew about yourself. And what feels like transformation is actually just the rest of you surfacing. When he arrives home, his form has shifted back toward the familiar yellow. Not because the alien part was defeated or denied. Because he made his peace with it, recognized it as his, incorporated it into his full understanding of himself. And when the need to perform a specific form in order to believe in his own existence dissolved. The form he chose was the one that felt most like him right now, which was the familiar one. The blue five-eyed alien is not less Jake. The comfortable yellow dog is not more Jake. Jake is the thing that contains both. His identity was never in his appearance. It was in how he loves and what he chooses and who he shows up for. That held. That always holds. The essay on abstract from the AV Club captured something important about its broader resonance. The exploration worked as a meditation on any experience of significant transformation where you need the people around you to still recognize you while also acknowledging that you have genuinely changed. Jake's answer to the question of identity across change is not a clever philosophical formulation. It is a practice of returning to the things that are actually yours, the love, the presence, the warmth, and trusting that these will be recognizable as you regardless of the form that contains them. Part 10. Together Again, What Blew My Mind. A Legacy Made of Love. Somewhere between the end of the main series and the Distant Lands specials, Jake the dog dies. The show does not give us the scene. We see its shadow in the Obsidian special, an older Finn walking through his life with a large memorial tattoo of Jake on his chest. Forget-me-not flowers surrounding the image. Jake is gone. Finn is here. The tattoo is the kind of art you put on your body when the person cannot be near you anymore and you need to keep carrying them somehow, in the only form still available. By Together Again, Finn has also died. He finds himself in the land of the dead, navigated by Mr. Fox and populated by everyone who ever mattered to him. And his primary orientation beneath everything else is, find Jake. Jake is in the 50th Dead World, the highest one, the one closest to Nirvana in Adventure Time's 50-level cosmology of afterlives. Jake is there because Jake belongs there. He has moved through his life and his death and arrived somewhere settled and right. Getting to Jake requires an adventure, naturally, involving a villain called New Death, who has taken over the afterlife and intends to stop the cycle of reincarnation entirely. New Death wants to freeze everything, to end the possibility of new lives, and new choices and new beginnings. He is structurally exactly the wrong kind of villain for Jake's story to end on. A force that wants to deny the world the generative possibility of change and continuation. The fight against New Death is the fight for everything Jake has always stood for. The irreducible value of getting to begin again. When Finn finally reaches Jake, there's a strangeness between them. Jake has been in the afterlife longer. He has made his peace with this new existence and the closeness of their living relationship. The daily presence, the shared texture of every ordinary day, is now memory rather than current reality. Jake is at peace. Finn's arrival stirs something back into activity that had been at rest. They defeat New Death. Balance is restored. The cycle of reincarnation continues. Jake begins to float back toward his place in the 50th Dead World. He is ready to return to that peace. He has earned it, without question, across an entire good life. Finn is willing to let him go, because Jake's happiness matters more than Finn's desire to have him near. And then Jake changes his mind. He comes back down. One more life. One more round through the world, in new forms, in new circumstances, with the opportunity to find each other again and keep being in the world together. The peace of the 50th Dead World will still be there. This opportunity won't. And Jake, who has always chosen presence over absence when presence was available, makes the same choice at the end that he made at every point in his life. They fist bump in the space between forms and go. What does Jake leave behind? He leaves Finn, who grew up shaped by a voice that said, "Suck first, then get better. Focus on what is real. Homies help homies always." Finn grew up into someone capable of genuine growth and genuine love. And a significant part of that capacity came from being accompanied through the process by someone who never made the development feel like a burden. He leaves Lady Rainicorn, with whom he played viola every afternoon at 4 o'clock, and raised 5 remarkable pups, and built a life out of small, consistent choices made daily over years. He leaves a love story about what love looks like in its middle decades. Not dramatic or declarative, but present. Warm, made of music and showing up. He leaves 5 children, each shaped by having a father who loved them without making the love a performance. Charlie and Jake Jr. and Kim Kilwan and TV and Viola, out in the world now, living their own stories. He leaves the land of Ooze slightly warmer than he found it, which is exactly the right amount. Not world-changing, not cosmically transformative, just warmer. Just a little more filled with the quality of presence and care that makes a place somewhere people actually want to be. The philosophy of Jake the Dog is not a system with a name and founding documents. It is a way of being in the world that was demonstrated rather than argued, embodied rather than theorized. It says that present moments are not rehearsals. They are the thing itself. That the first step is sucking, and that is fine. That love is mostly the daily appointment kept. That who you are is not determined by your origins or your worst choices or what anyone else believes about you. That identity holds through change if it is built on what actually matters. That you can face the croak dream with equanimity because you have been spending your time on what actually matters. And when the time spent that way is its own answer to mortality. And that sometimes the wisest possible wish is a pastrami sandwich. Because the sandwich is here, now, real and warm, exactly what you actually wanted. And the present moment, inhabited fully and without reservation, is the whole point. And that is where we land tonight in the warm yellow company of the most philosophically sophisticated magical dog in the history of animated television. Bait, who carried wisdom the way he carried everything, effortlessly, without ceremony, as if it was just the obvious thing. He who did not intend to be a philosopher and became one anyway through the accumulated practice of simply living with care and attention, and the kind of love that shows up every day at 4 o'clock. If any piece of this resonated, if something in Jake's approach to the world is something you recognized or needed or will carry forward into tomorrow, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There is more of this here, and I think if this one found you at the right moment, you will find that the rest of it does too. And one last thing in Jake's general direction. What are you getting hung up on right now that is not yet real? What imaginary problem is sitting in the center of your attention, while the actual present moment things, the warmth, the sound, the quiet of wherever you are right now, wait patiently at the edge of it? Set down the cup. Come back to what is real. That was always the whole lesson. Sleep well, like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Jake the dog would appreciate it, so would I. And extended reflections. The full philosophical universe of Jake the dog. On the nature of Jake's powers as philosophy. Jake's stretchy powers are not incidental to his character. They are his character, externalized. The show makes this point more than once, but it is easy to treat the powers as simply a useful narrative device, a way to get the characters into and out of situations, a visual comedic tool, an interesting superpower in a world full of interesting superpowers, without sitting with what they actually represent when considered alongside everything else we know about Jake. The powers appeared when he was born. They emerged out of Warren Ampersand's alien biology, passed through Joshua's body, and arrived in Jake already active, already his, already natural, already the way he related to physical reality from the moment he existed. He did not acquire them through training or discipline or a magical accident. They were simply what he was from the beginning. And what they allow him to do is to be simultaneously many things without any of them being false. He can be enormous and small. He can be a bridge and a weapon and a cushion and a container. He can stretch towards something far away while remaining rooted where he started. He can reshape himself completely and still be recognizably himself when he comes back to his resting form. The powers are a visible, physical expression of the same quality that defines his philosophical temperament. The capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to adapt to circumstances without losing the thread of who he is, how to reach across enormous distances and still maintain connection to the ground. The Good Men Project essay makes this comparison explicitly. Jake's physical flexibility symbolizes his flexible personality and go-with-the-flow attitude. The show itself suggests something similar through the episode Abstract, which uses his physical transformation and the question of whether he is still himself as the central metaphor for any experience of significant change in the identity question it raises. But there is something more specific worth examining. Jake's powers are most useful when he is in service of something beyond himself, when he uses them to protect Finn, to create pathways, to hold things together, when he uses them to demonstrate a philosophical point by becoming the living example rather than just stating the principle. His powers at their best are relational. They work through connection. This is not a coincidence. Jake's entire character is most fully expressed in relation. He is most himself when he is with Finn, with Lady, with his children, with BMO, with anyone whose presence draws him into genuine engagement. The powers that define him physically are most fully used in exactly the situations where his philosophical orientation is most active, in the service of the people he loves. The stretching is the love made visible. On the philosophy of sandwiches and why it is not trivial. The running joke about Jake and sandwiches has survived for more than a decade of fan discussion because it is not actually a joke, or not only a joke. It is a compressed philosophical statement delivered in the form of comedy, which is how Jake delivers most of his compressed philosophical statements. Jake loves sandwiches. He loves them specifically and with genuine enthusiasm and in a way that other characters find slightly disproportionate. The episode Jake the Dog is built around his decision to use his single cosmic wish, the kind of wish that can reshape timelines, save worlds, alter the fundamental structure of reality, on a pastrami sandwich. The episode is a comedy. It is also a statement about desire, about clarity, about the particular wisdom of wanting what you actually want rather than what you think you are supposed to want. When Prismo offers Jake a wish for anything, what Jake experiences in that moment is not the wide-open anxiety of too much possibility. He experiences clarity. He knows what he wants. He has always known what he wants. Thus, the cosmic opportunity does not change the content of his desire. It just removes the usual filters that keep people from expressing what they actually want. The filters that say you should want something bigger, something more important, something befitting the magnitude of this moment. Jake does not have those filters. He wants the sandwich. He wishes for the sandwich. He gets the sandwich. He is satisfied. This is philosophically an expression of what the Stoics meant by preferring according to nature, wanting things that are genuinely good rather than things that merely appear valuable or impressive. Jake is not performing simple-mindedness by wishing for a sandwich. He is expressing a genuine and clear preference, to free from the performance of having preferences that other people will find appropriately ambitious or sophisticated. He wants what he actually wants, in this specific moment, which is a good sandwich, and he gets it, and he is happy. The alternative, wishing for power, for wealth, for abstract future goods, for things that seem like they should matter more, is almost always performed desire. The desire to have desires that look like the right kind of desires. Jake has opted out of this entirely. He wants the sandwich. He has always wanted the sandwich. This is what wisdom looks like when it is not trying to impress anyone. The sandwiches also serve as a recurring symbol of the present moment and the sufficiency of immediate sensory, specific pleasure. You cannot eat a sandwich abstractly, but you cannot enjoy a sandwich while thinking about a different sandwich. A sandwich is irreducibly present tense, requiring your actual presence to be actually experienced. Jake's love of sandwiches is his love of the present moment, made concrete, made edible, made shareable. Every sandwich in the show is a small endorsement of the here and now. Even the sandwich Prismo makes for him in the time room, the cosmic pastrami, is understood by Jake to be a sandwich being eaten now, in this specific moment, in the company of a person he likes, which is the same quality every other sandwich he has eaten possessed. The cosmic does not add to it. The ordinariness of it is the point. On Jake's relationship to fear. Jake is afraid of things. This is easy to overlook because his general temperament is so calm, so unfussed, so oriented toward ease, that the moments when fear breaks through the surface are startling in their specificity. He is afraid of intrusion in a way that is somewhat out of proportion to the stimulus. The episode's Conquest of Cuteness and Earth and Water both show him reacting to unexpected presences in the tree fort with a terror that produces the very un-Jake behavior of rushing to Finn and clinging to him. He is afraid of spiders. Both he and Finn are afraid of spiders, as confirmed in Marceline's closet, which is one of the show's more unexpectedly relatable revelations. He has fears about his children, as Jake the dad demonstrates. The overnight terror of watching over the pups, unable to sleep because something might happen to them. The specific vulnerability of having things you love that you cannot control the safety of. Yet he has moments of anxiety about Lady, about the relationship, about whether he is adequate in the ways he worries about being adequate. What Jake does not do is let these fears become the architecture of his daily experience. He does not let them colonize the present moment. He experiences them when they arise because they arise in specific situations in response to specific things, and then he releases them when the situation passes. He does not carry them around as ongoing weather. He does not build elaborate systems of avoidance to prevent himself from ever having to encounter the things that scare him. This is the Stoic approach to fear made practical. Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca all address the question of how to hold fear appropriately, not by suppressing it or by pretending danger is not real, but by recognizing when the fear is producing useful information, there is a present danger, take action, versus when it is producing suffering without information. There is no present danger, you are just anxious about a possible future one. Jake distinguishes between these. He reacts when there is something to react to. He releases when there is not. The moment in The New Frontier where he faces his croak dream is the fullest expression of this. The fear of dying is real. The croak dream is a genuine prophetic vision of his actual eventual death. There is no inauthenticity in acknowledging that this matters, that death matters, that the loss of his specific individual consciousness into whatever comes after matters. And Jake's response is not the absence of that acknowledgement. And it is the acknowledgement paired with something like acceptance. a willingness to hold the fact of mortality without being destabilized by it, because being destabilized by facts is not a useful response to facts. The fact is real. The life in front of him is also real. He chooses to occupy the life rather than the fear. This is the full arc of Jake's relationship to fear. Feel it when it's there, release it when it can be released, face it when it must be faced, and keep living the life in between all of that as fully as possible. On how Jake's philosophy relates to Finn's development. It is impossible to fully understand Jake's philosophy without understanding the relationship through which most of it is expressed. Jake's wisdom is relational. It emerges from and is shaped by the specific dynamic of being Finn's older brother and companion, and it is most fully visible in how that dynamic plays out over the course of the show. Finn starts as a boy whose entire identity is organized around heroism. He believes in the power of direct action, in the possibility of correct solutions, in the idea that enough will and courage applied to any problem will produce the right outcome. He is good-hearted and brave and genuinely admirable in these qualities. He is also, for much of the early show, remarkably brittle in the face of situations that do not yield to will and courage. Emotional complexity, loss, moral ambiguity, the discovery that some problems do not have solutions, but only management. Jake does not challenge Finn's fundamental goodness. While he does not try to make Finn less brave or less committed, what he does, quietly and consistently over years, is introduce Finn to the existence of a different relationship with experience than the one Finn started with. He models the possibility of being okay with not knowing, of holding difficulty without being defined by it, of finding the present moment sufficient even when the future is unclear. The influence is not didactic. Jake rarely sits Finn down to deliver a lesson. His guidance is mostly transmitted through how he is, through the quality of his presence, through his responses to things, through the way he occupies difficult situations without being consumed by them. Finn watches how Jake is and absorbs it over years until some of it becomes part of how Finn is. By the later seasons of the show, Finn has developed a capacity for equanimity that his earlier self did not have. He can hold more ambiguity. He is more willing to sit with uncertainty rather than forcing resolution. He is more present with difficulty rather than running headlong at it. These changes are partly the product of his own experience and maturation. They are also, undeniably, partly the product of having had Jake as the primary example of how to be in the world for the formative years of his development. This is how wisdom actually transmits between generations. Not through pronouncement, not through formal teaching, but through living example encountered closely over enough time that some of its qualities transfer. Jake did not set out to teach Finn how to be. He just was how he was every day in Finn's presence. And the daily encounter with that particular way of being had its effect. The show's final special, Together Again, confirms this inheritance. The older Finn who appears in Obsidian, the one with the Jake tattoo, the one who has lived decades of his own adult life after Jake's death, is recognizably shaped by Jake's influence. He carries something of Jake's quality in how he moves through the world. Not the same, not identical, Finn has his own character that is entirely his own, but shaped by the long encounter with Jake's way of being, in the same way any person is shaped by the sustained presence of someone they loved. Jake's legacy is not in what he said. It is in what he was and in who Finn became from being near it. On simplicity as sophistication. One of the things that makes Jake philosophically interesting in a way that is easy to underestimate is that his wisdom almost never sounds like wisdom. It sounds like something obvious, something someone would say when they are not trying very hard, something almost too simple to take seriously as a philosophical position. Sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. That sounds like a throwaway line. You're getting hung up on imaginary problems. You gotta focus on what's real. That sounds like casual advice. To live life, you need problems. That sounds slightly absurd. And yet, each of these, when examined, turns out to be either directly referencing established philosophical traditions or independently arriving at conclusions those traditions worked very hard to reach. The first is a precise statement about the structure of skill acquisition. The second is a practical application of Epictetus. The third is an observation that aligns with multiple strands of existentialist thought about the role of challenge in generating meaning. The simplicity is not laziness. The simplicity is the compression that happens when something is understood well enough to be stated concisely. Philosophers who have not yet fully understood something tend to use more words, not fewer. The elaborate system is often a sign that the thinker is still working through the material. The one-liner is sometimes a sign that they have arrived somewhere. Jake speaks in one-liners because he has arrived somewhere. Not through formal study, not through deliberate philosophical work, but through the slow compression of lived experience into wisdom that has lost the scaffolding of the reasoning that produced it and becomes simply the conclusion. He cannot always explain why the thing he is saying is true. He just knows it is. And that kind of knowing, the kind that has been through enough experience to have simplified itself into a clear statement, is often more practically useful than the kind that can still be dismantled into its component arguments. The apparent simplicity is the sophistication. It took a whole life to get from the complicated raw material to that clean sentence. Jake has been at it a long time. On the texture of ooh as the context for Jake's philosophy. Jake's philosophy does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in the specific context of the land of ooh, a post-apocalyptic world built on the ruins of a civilization called the Mushroom War. A place where the laws of physics are more like suggestions, where candy is alive and trees have houses in them and rainbows are sentient, and the hierarchy of being includes everything from microscopic candy pigs to ancient cosmic entities who live outside of time. In this context, certain questions that occupy more conventional philosophical traditions become somewhat moot. The nature of consciousness, for instance, is less of a puzzle in ooh than in our world. Conscious beings of enormously varied kinds coexist in the same space. And the question of what makes something a subject of moral consideration rather than an object is settled almost entirely by pragmatics. Everything here might be conscious. You treat it accordingly. Death is also differently textured in ooh. The show's cosmology includes an organized afterlife with 50 levels, with death as an actual being who can be negotiated with, and in Together Again, defeated and replaced, with reincarnation as a documented cycle that continues across multiple lives. Jake's acceptance of mortality is easier to understand in this context. He genuinely believes, with some cosmological basis for believing, that dying is not the end of his individual experience, but a transformation. He believes his consciousness goes somewhere and something happens to it after. This is not mere hope. It is ooh cosmology, back confirmed by multiple episodes. But even accounting for this cosmological context, Jake's acceptance of mortality is remarkable. He does not simply accept death because his world has confirmed that something comes after. He accepts death as a feature of the structure of existence, rather than a violation of it. As something that gives the life before it its texture and meaning, rather than something that invalidates or diminishes that life. He would have this acceptance, even if nothing came after. The acceptance is not contingent on the afterlife. It is prior to it. The context of ooh also gives Jake's philosophy of the present moment a particular resonance. In a world where time travel is possible, where alternate timelines exist and can be visited, but where the past and future are simultaneously accessible to certain beings, the choice to live in the present is more deliberate, more philosophical, more conscious than it would be in a world where the present is simply where you are stuck. Jake chooses the present in a context where other options are available. That choice is meaningful. On Jake's silence as wisdom. Some of the most important things Jake communicates, he does not say. He communicates them through presence, through the quality of attention he brings to a conversation, through the specific way he holds a piece of information that someone has just shared with him, through the timing of when he speaks and when he does not. He communicates them through action, through showing up at 4 o'clock rather than talking about how important Lady is, through learning Korean rather than explaining that he values Lady's experience, through the series of small, consistent choices that constitute his relationships. The show occasionally lets the camera simply observe Jake in moments of quiet, not building toward anything, not moving the plot forward, just Being present with a character who has put down the performance of character for a moment and is simply occupying the space. These moments, sitting on the roof, playing the viola alone, watching the afternoon from wherever he happens to be, are not filler. They are the show demonstrating, directly and without narration, what the philosophy looks like when it is not being stated. This is what it looks like to be here, to be in your own life, actually in it without agenda. That the silence is also present in how he handles difficult information. When Finn is struggling, Jake often waits longer before speaking than other characters would. He lets the difficulty be present for a moment before he redirects. This is not passivity. It is the recognition that the first function of a companion in a hard moment is to be present with the difficulty rather than immediately solving it. The being present matters as much as the eventual guidance. There is wisdom in not filling space. Jake knows this. His comfort with silence, with the spaces between words, with the quiet of an afternoon, with the not knowing that is genuinely just not knowing, rather than a problem requiring immediate resolution, is as much a part of his philosophy as any of the things he says. On what Jake's story teaches about being a person. There is a word the show uses repeatedly in connection with Jake, across multiple seasons and contexts, and it is worth sitting with. The word is homies. Homies help homies, always. This is Jake at his most foundational, most stripped down. When you take away all the stoic references and all the philosophy of the present moment, and all the wisdom about sucking being the beginning, and all the complex negotiations with identity and mortality, when you take all of that away and ask what Jake's core value actually is, it is this. People help people. The people who are yours, you help. You are always available to them. That is the whole commitment. That is the entire structure of how he lives. All the philosophy leads here. So the present moment awareness is in service of being actually present with the people you love. The acceptance of mortality is in service of taking the time with people seriously rather than deferring it. The refusal to fester is in service of staying available to people rather than retreating into endless private suffering. The flexibility, the warmth, the groundedness, all of it is in service of being genuinely and reliably there for the people who matter. Jake's philosophical sophistication is not an end in itself. It is a foundation for the kind of person he is. The person who shows up, who plays viola with you every day at 4 o'clock, who meets you in the afterlife when you need finding, who chooses one more life because your company in it is worth more than perfect peace alone. That is what all the wisdom is for. Oh, it is for being a person who can actually be there for another person, fully, consistently, with real quality of presence and attention, rather than distracted or anxious or half elsewhere. Homies help homies, always. That is the whole philosophy. Everything else is just what makes that possible. And now we really do land, at the end of a long journey through the mind and life and world of a yellow dog, who somehow figured out more about being a person than most people manage in the same amount of time. Jake the dog, shapeshifter, viola player, daily 4 o'clock appointment keeper, father, former criminal, stoic by accident, lover by practice, friend by sustained deliberate choice. One of the most genuinely and fully philosophically realized characters in the history of animated television. Was wrapped in the aesthetic of a relaxed golden retriever who would cheerfully spend a cosmic wish on a sandwich and feel entirely at peace with that decision. He came into the world singing. He moved through it with warmth and flexibility and deep presence. He left it at peace, in the right world, and then chose to come back for one more round because the people he loved were going back, and that was reason enough. If this found you at the right moment, if Jake's way of being in the world is something you needed to hear about tonight, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There is more here. You will find it. And remember, the first step is sucking. The cup can go. Homies help homies. Focus on what is real. Sleep well. Like and subscribe. Jake the dog would appreciate it, and so would I. But further reflections, going deeper into the layers, on the relationship between Jake's laziness and his depth. There is a persistent misreading of Jake the dog that treats his laid-back quality as a kind of intellectual limitation, as if the ease with which he moves through the world were evidence that he has not thought very hard about it, that his contentment is the contentment of someone who has not quite grasped the full weight of existence. This misreading is understandable because the packaging is deliberately casual. Jake delivers his most insightful observations with the tone of someone reading from a shopping list. He achieves peace through apparent effortlessness. He does not perform the labor of his wisdom, but the depth is there. It is simply wearing different clothes than most people expect wisdom to wear. But consider the episode Power Animal, in which Finn is in genuine danger and Jake is supposed to be rescuing him, but keeps getting distracted by literally everything he passes. A party here, an interesting creature there, a beautiful piece of music around a corner. He loses focus repeatedly and spectacularly. From a purely functional standpoint, this is a failure of discipline and attention. Jake cannot stay on task. The mission suffers. But here's the thing about Jake's distractibility. It is the dark side of his greatest strength. His capacity to be fully present to whatever is actually in front of him, the quality that makes him genuinely available to people, that makes his attention feel real when it is on you, that makes his pleasure in small things authentic rather than performed, is the same capacity that makes it hard for him to maintain abstract focus on a goal when interesting, present-moment things keep offering themselves. The gift and the liability are the same quality operating in different contexts. This is not a character flaw bolted onto an otherwise perfect figure. It is the show demonstrating something true about how actual human or magical dog qualities work. They do not come separated into virtues and vices. They come as packages. The openness to the present moment that allows Jake to be genuinely here when he is here also makes it hard for him to maintain future-oriented focus when the present is sufficiently interesting. The same depth that produces his wisdom also produces his distraction. You cannot have Jake's quality of presence without his difficulty of sustained abstract focus, because they are not two separate traits. They are one trait expressing itself differently in different situations. Understanding this makes Jake more real, not less. He is not a wise figure with a lazy quirk tacked on for comic purposes. He is a coherent whole with genuine strengths and genuine difficulties, all of it arising from the same underlying orientation toward the world. On the music in Jake's bones. The viola is not the only music in Jake's life. Music surrounds him. It is the medium through which Adventure Time as a show communicates emotion and meaning, and Jake is one of its primary carriers. He beatboxes. He sings along with Finn in the moments where the show breaks into the musical numbers that Adventure Time uses to make certain things expressible that cannot be said directly. He knows songs. He carries them around in him the way some people carry words and other people carry images. Music is a native language for him, one of the most natural ways he knows to be present with another person. This matters philosophically because music is, among all the arts, perhaps the one that is most irreducibly present tense. You cannot experience music in the past tense. You can remember it, can carry the emotional association of it, can describe it in retrospect. But the actual experience of music happens in time. It unfolds through moments, requiring your attention to each moment as it passes, and the full experience only exists in the lived duration of the piece. Music cannot be abstracted out of the present moment. It is built from present moments, one after another. Jake's musicality is the deepest expression of his present tense orientation. When he plays the viola with Lady at 4 o'clock every afternoon, he is not just doing something he enjoys with someone he loves, though he is doing that. He is participating in an art form that requires exactly the quality of presence that defines his character. You cannot play music while being somewhere else mentally. You can only play it while you are there, now, with the instrument, with the other player, in the specific acoustics of this specific room, in this specific afternoon. The music is the practice. The 4 o'clock appointment is the commitment. The love is the reason. All three are inseparable. There is also something worth noting about what Jake chooses to play. The classical pieces he reaches for in moments of solo musicianship, Mozart, Beethoven, are not casual choices. These are works that have survived centuries because they contain something about the quality of experience that keeps mattering. When Jake plays the Moonlight Sonata in the dark while trying to lure a horse away, the joke is that it does not work. The resonance underneath the joke is that these pieces carry weight even in absurd contexts, that beauty persists even when deployed for ridiculous purposes, that the music is bigger than any single use of it. Jake keeps the music close because it is the most direct technology available to him for staying present, for being actually here, for expressing things that do not have other languages. It is how he loves Lady. It is how he processes difficult emotions. It is how he occupies solitary time. It is one of the most reliable paths he knows back to himself. In Death in Bloom, Finn describes Jake as the musical one. This is a brief throwaway characterization in service of a plot point, but it sticks because it is exactly right. Jake is the musical one. And in a show that uses music as one of its primary modes of emotional truth-telling, being the musical one is not a small thing. On the Land of Oo's post-apocalyptic heart and Jake's response to it. The Land of Oo is post-apocalyptic. This is established gradually across the series and confirmed explicitly in later seasons. The vast magical and physical strangeness of Oo is the result of the Mushroom War, and a catastrophic nuclear conflict that ended human civilization as we understand it, approximately 1,000 years before the show's present. The humans are gone or nearly gone. The Land of Oo is what grew up in the ruins of what they left. This context gives Jake's philosophy a dimension that it is easy to miss if you focus only on the immediate relationships and immediate wisdom. Jake is living in a world that was destroyed. The ground he sits on, the air he breathes, the candy kingdoms and magical forests and vast dungeons, all of it grew out of the ruin of something else. The entire world he knows is the aftermath, and his response to this is to live in it fully, not to mourn the world that was lost, not to organize his existence around the tragedy that preceded him, but to inhabit the present world with the same quality of attention and warmth and care that would make sense in any world. The ruins are not irrelevant. They show up in the show's mythology and inform its emotional register. But they are also just where he lives. This is his land. These are his people. This afternoon is his afternoon. And all of it is real and worth being present for, regardless of what it was built on. There is something in this that resonates with broader questions about how to live in inherited difficult circumstances. In a world that has been through terrible things, in a place shaped by loss and damage, in the aftermath of what other people did to each other. Jake does not pretend the history did not happen, but he also does not let it become the primary fact about his existence. He is here now in what is. Now that is enough to work with. That is, in fact, everything that ever gets worked with. Because here now in what is the only place any of us ever actually are. The post-apocalyptic setting is not just aesthetic in Adventure Time. It is a genuine philosophical context. Jake's philosophy, developed and practiced in a world that was fundamentally broken before he arrived, and is nonetheless full of life and love and ridiculous joy, is a philosophy about how to live in exactly those circumstances. Not in ideal circumstances, not in a world where everything is fine. In this world, as it is, with its particular combination of magic and damage and history and possibility, he did not choose the world he was born into. He chose what to do with being in it. On the question of what Jake knows, that he does not know he knows. One of the most interesting things about Jake's wisdom is the question of its source. He does not read philosophy. He does not appear to have engaged in formal contemplative practice. He does not seem to have arrived at his understanding through deliberate intellectual work in the way that, say, Princess Bubblegum arrives at her understanding of biochemistry and the nature of candy life through systematic research. Jake's knowledge has a different texture. It feels discovered from the inside rather than constructed from the outside. The Adventure Time Wiki explicitly notes that Jake's scene in Pooh Hoy, the cup-throwing Epictetus reference, is a direct philosophical allusion, which means the writers put it there deliberately, knowing exactly what they were referencing. But Jake does not know he is referencing Epictetus. He knows that focusing on imaginary problems causes unnecessary suffering, and that the right response to unnecessary suffering is to release attachment to things outside your control. He knows this the way you know things you learned from living, not as a proposition you can cite, but as a truth you have inhabited. This distinction matters because it reflects something real about how wisdom is actually acquired and used. The philosophical tradition, the texts, the arguments, the carefully constructed systems, is one way of encoding and transmitting insight. But there is another kind of knowledge that comes from the sustained attention of a person who is genuinely curious about what is true and who has been paying that attention consistently for a long time. Jake has been paying that attention, not to philosophy, but to life. And life, attended to carefully, eventually yields many of the same conclusions that philosophy arrived at through different routes. This convergence, the meeting point between the ancient Greek Stoics and a yellow dog in a post-apocalyptic candy world, is one of the quietly extraordinary things about the show. It says that wisdom is not proprietary. It is not owned by any tradition or system or formal approach. It arises wherever someone is paying close enough attention to what is actually true, in whatever context that attention is being paid. Jake is that person. He has been paying close attention his whole life to what is actually true. And the conclusions he arrives at are good ones. They hold up. They work in practice. They make life better when applied. How that they arrived through living with Finn and Lady and in the tree fort and on the roof watching clouds, rather than through reading Epictetus in a library somewhere, does not make them less real or less useful or less worth understanding. It might, in some ways, make them more so, because you can tell that they work not because they are theoretically correct, but because a whole life was built on them and the life turned out good. On the final lesson, being someone worth finding, the emotional center of Together Again is not the fight against new death, though that fight is real and matters. The emotional center is Finn's confession. Finn, who has lived decades of his own adult life after Jake's death, who built relationships and had adventures and lived fully and well as his own person, confesses to Jake in the afterlife that underneath all of it, for all those years, some part of him was simply waiting. Not in a passive or destructive way, not in a way that prevented him from living, but in the specific way that certain loves work, the way certain connections shape a life even in the absence of the person they are connected to. He was always, underneath everything, waiting until he could be with Jake again. This confession is one of the most honest things the show ever has a character say. That it acknowledges something that is true about certain relationships and that we do not often say out loud. That some people are so fundamental to the texture of your experience that their absence is not just a loss, but a kind of ongoing orientation. You do not stop living when they go. You continue living, fully and genuinely. And you are also, somewhere in you, continuously in motion toward the reunion. Jake's response to this is not to be burdened by it or to feel guilty for having died first and left Finn with that waiting. He receives it as the statement of love it is, and responds to it with the only form of response that makes sense. He chooses, when the moment comes, to go back with Finn rather than staying in his peaceful afterlife alone. This is the final expression of Jake's entire philosophy. All the present moment awareness, all the flexibility, all the stoic wisdom about what matters and what does not, all of it circles back to this. People matter more than peace. Connection matters more than contentment. The particular warmth of a specific relationship, irreplaceable and specific and charged with the particular history that only these two beings share, is worth more than the generic peace of nirvana without company. Jake already knew this. He knew it at 4 o'clock with Lady. He knew it in the tree fort with Finn. He knew it in every ordinary afternoon that he inhabited fully rather than passing through on the way to somewhere else. He knew it in the Croak dream acceptance. That the time he had was made more valuable by its finiteness, and that spending it with the people he loved was the right use of it. He chose Finn, one more time, because choosing Finn is what you do when you are Jake. It is not even a difficult choice, it is just the obvious thing, the only thing that makes sense, expressed as a last-minute rush back toward the person whose presence makes one more life worth living. Be the kind of person worth finding in the afterlife. Be the kind of person whose absence is an orientation for people who loved you. Be the kind of person who, when given the choice between perfect peace and another round with the people you love, chooses the people without hesitation. That is the final lesson. That is what a whole life of philosophy built out of present moments and daily appointments and flexible love and casual wisdom was pointing toward all along. Jake the dog. Worth finding. Worth staying for. Worth choosing. Every time. This is dozing off time. And you have spent a good amount of time in the company of a very good dog. I hope some of his philosophy found a comfortable corner in your mind where it can live and be useful. I hope the next difficult moment you walk into, you hear something in the distance that sounds like, focus on what is real, man. And I hope it helps. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me where you are and what time it is and whether any of this landed the way I hoped. That kind of feedback genuinely shapes what I make next, and I want to make things that are worth your time. Sleep well. The dungeons can wait. The viola is playing somewhere in the afternoon, and you have enough time to be here right now before anything else needs to happen. That is always enough. On the way Jake moves through the world, there is something worth sitting with a little longer. And it is the way Jake physically occupies space. His body stretches. It contracts. It becomes a house, a boat, a weapon, a bridge. He can make himself enormous or reduce himself to something that fits inside a coat pocket. And yet he almost never makes a big deal about it. He uses the ability the way you use your hands. Naturally, without announcement, the power is just part of him and he neither performs it nor hides it. That is an unusual relationship to have with your own gifts. Most people, and most fictional characters too, honestly, fall into one of two patterns when they have something that sets them apart. Either they build their whole personality around it, leaning in hard, making the ability the first and last thing they want you to know about them. Or they go the other direction and hide it. Just bury it under self-deprecation or fear, trying to look like everyone else to avoid drawing attention. Jake does neither. He just uses what he has when it is useful, and then he sets it down and goes back to thinking about lunch. This is actually harder to do than it looks. There is a real discipline in not becoming your abilities, in not letting the thing that makes you unusual become the cage that defines you. Jake's stretching is interesting for about 30 seconds in the context of who Jake actually is, because who Jake actually is runs a lot deeper than that. He is curious and funny and occasionally wise and deeply in love, and sometimes wrong in very specific ways that he has to grow past. The powers are just logistics. They help him go places and do things, but they do not make him Jake. This is the same lesson, a restated in body language. You are not your resume. You are not your most impressive feature. You are not the thing other people most quickly identify you with from the outside. You are the whole complicated interior of yourself, the private thoughts and the warm feelings and the quiet habits you have developed over a long life of paying attention and making mistakes and caring about things deeply even when you pretend not to. Jake knows this at a cellular level, and somehow that knowledge lives in his body. In the easy, unshowy way he uses what he has and does not let it inflate him into something he is not. There is also something to be said about the joy he takes in physical things. A good stretch, a comfortable nap position, the exact right temperature of a hot dog. These are not side details in Jake's life. They are full and legitimate pleasures that he savors completely. He is not distracted during enjoyment. He is not already thinking about the next thing. He is present in the moment of the good soup in a way that most people, even people who love soup, never quite manage. Presence is the discipline. Not mindfulness as a performance, not meditation as a productivity hack, but the actual animal fact of being in the moment you are currently inhabiting. Jake is an expert. He learned it the way dogs learn things, which is by doing it constantly and without being embarrassed about wanting comfort and warmth. That is the part we tend to skip, actually, the not being embarrassed. There is a cultural pressure to treat pleasure as something you have to justify or earn or apologize for, and Jake has never picked up that particular neurosis. Yet he wants what he wants. He enjoys what he enjoys. He does not perform indifference to comfort while secretly craving it. which is a game a lot of people play and it makes them miserable. Jake just lets himself like things. He lets himself have a good time. He lets himself rest. And somehow, that radical permission to be a creature with preferences and sensations and an appetite for warmth is one of the most quietly radical things about him. Rest is not a reward for productivity. Pleasure is not something you earn by suffering first. Enjoyment is available right now in the very texture of the present moment, if you stop apologizing for wanting it. Jake has known this his whole life. Maybe he learned it from Joshua. Maybe he learned it from a particularly good afternoon nap. Maybe he just arrived in the world already knowing it. Because some truths are simpler than we make them, and a dog who can stretch himself into any shape still chooses, most days, to be the shape that is warm and close to the people he loves. That is the whole lesson, restated one more time for the road. Be the shape that is warm. Be close to the people you love. Use what you have without performing it. Enjoy the hot dog fully. Let the rest of it go. Good night. The soup was always good. You were always enough. The afternoon always had a little warmth left in it, even when you could not feel it. Jake knew. And now, somewhere between sleep and the quiet hum of everything you have been carrying today, maybe you know it too.